The last moment of a climber's life is often the quietest. No screaming, no drama, just the sudden realization that physics has taken over and human will no longer matters. But those moments, preserved in GPS tracks and gear analysis, tell stories of how quickly confidence becomes catastrophe. In the past 2 decades, 189 climbers have died in ways that defied their experience, skill, and preparation. Their final seconds becoming case studies in how the vertical world punishes even perfect technique. From the speed climber whose flow state was interrupted by a handhold that had been slowly loosening for decades, his perfect rhythm shattered by geological patience, to the winter soloist whose final transmission described perfect conditions, never knowing that the weather system approaching would bury his voice in static forever. To the traditional climber who watched his protection fail in sequence, each piece pulling out and loading the next until his safety system became a domino effect of destruction. But first, the experienced alpinist who made the fatal decision to continue past his turnaround time, his oxygen-starved brain unable to recognize that summit fever had already sealed his fate. These weren't failures of preparation or lapses in judgment. They were collisions between human timescales and mountain timescales, where a climber's final moment was determined not by their choices, but by forces that had been building pressure for millennia before they ever touched stone. May the 15th, 2006. 28,000 feet on Mount Everest. David Sharp sits down in what climbers call Green Boots Cave, a small rock alcove named for the frozen remains of another climber whose bright green mountaineering boots have become a macabre landmark. Sharp is a 34-year-old British climber attempting a solo summit without supplemental oxygen. The temperature hovers around -40 degrees Fahrenheit, with winds gusting to 25 miles per hour. Conditions considered near perfect in the death zone. Sharp has already passed his turnaround time by 3 hours, 3 critical hours that would mean the difference between life and death. But he continues upward, driven by a force more powerful than reason. At extreme altitude, hypoxia-induced delirium begins affecting judgment in subtle, then dramatic ways. The brain, starved of oxygen, loses its ability to assess risk. The sunk cost fallacy takes hold, a psychological trap where previous investment justifies continued risk. With each laborious step upward, Sharp's oxygen-starved brain becomes less capable of processing danger signals correctly. Summit fever overrides survival instincts, a phenomenon so common in the death zone that experienced guides consider it the most dangerous moment in any expedition. Sharp reaches the summit at 2:30 p.m., a full 4.5 hours past the safe turnaround time. His descent begins in deteriorating conditions, exhaustion setting in rapidly. He makes it back to Green Boots Cave and sits down to rest. Hypothermia begins its silent work immediately. Over the next 8 hours, more than 40 climbers will pass David Sharp. Most assume he's simply resting, a normal sight on Everest where climbers often pause during descent. Some exchange words with him. None recognize that they're witnessing a man's final hours. The very act of sitting down in the death zone often becomes a climber's final action before death. By morning, Sharp is found still in sitting position, still conscious, but dying. A Turkish climbing team attempts rescue, but his advanced hypothermia makes movement impossible. They watch helplessly as he dies before their eyes, unable to carry him down from such extreme altitude. The controversy that erupts afterwards centers on the ethics of passing a dying climber, but the more profound lesson lies in understanding how summit fever creates fatal decision-making in oxygen-starved brains. Sharp's final moment was determined hours earlier when he pushed past his turnaround time, his fate sealed not by a dramatic fall, but by the simple act of sitting down to rest. October 23rd, 2006, Leaning Tower in Yosemite National Park. Todd Skinner begins the final pitch of a familiar aid route. He's a legendary free climber, 48 years old, climbing with a trusted partner on terrain he knows well. The weather is perfect. His harness shows no visible signs of wear or damage. What Skinner doesn't know is that his belay loop, the critical connection point in his harness, has been subjected to years of UV radiation and stress cycles. The nylon fibers are gradually weakening at a molecular level, invisible to inspection. He places protection normally, trusting his equipment completely. His partner belays from a secure anchor 150 feet below. When Skinner falls during a routine aid climbing move, it should be a normal, controlled fall. Instead, the belay loop fails catastrophically under standard climbing forces. The fall continues past all his protection as what climbers call the zipper effect begins. Each piece of gear pulls out in sequence, shock-loading the next piece until nothing remains between Skinner and the ground. The 200-foot ground fall results in massive trauma and instant death. Later analysis reveals the belay loop failure stemmed from UV degradation, an invisible enemy that had been weakening his gear for years. The climbing industry responds by implementing new harness inspection protocols and equipment retirement guidelines. Skinner's death highlights a terrifying truth. Perfect technique is useless when fundamental equipment fails without warning. April the 30th, 2017. Nuptse, Nepal. Ueli Stek, known as the Swiss Machine, climbs alone for acclimatization. The 40-year-old speed mountaineer is preparing for an ambitious Everest Lhotse traverse. He's solo climbing at 22,000 feet with no witnesses to what happens next. Only his GPS watch records his final movements. Stek climbs in what psychologists call the flow state, a zone of optimal performance where action and awareness merge. Speed climbing requires absolute focus and rhythm maintenance. A single mistake at this altitude is often fatal without a partner backup. The weather conditions are ideal, no external factors affect his climb. The GPS data tells the story. Stek's movement stops abruptly at 22,300 feet. His flow state is shattered by a single loose hold or momentary lapse. A 3,000-foot fall down Nuptse's southwest face follows. With no protection possible, there is nothing to arrest his descent. This is the silence of solo death. No witnesses, no calls for help, no final words. Only a GPS track that suddenly ends. His body is found by helicopter search teams 6 days later. The watch provides the only evidence of his final moments. The speed climbing community mourns the loss of its greatest practitioner, and the incident highlights the ultimate vulnerability of solo climbing. The flow state's fragility, how a single interruption can be fatal, becomes painfully evident. Solo climbing eliminates all safety margins and backup systems. The mountain's silence preserves no record of final moments, only the stark data point where movement ceased forever. 3 different ways the mountain claims climbers: the psychological trap that makes sitting down feel safe, the invisible equipment failure that turns protection into betrayal, and the shattered flow state that ends in silence. But the cruelest deaths involve communication, when climbers can speak to loved ones, but rescue becomes impossible. January 26, 2006. Makalu, Nepal. Jean-Christophe Lafaille makes his final satellite call. The French alpinist, 40 years old, is attempting the first solo winter ascent of this 8,485-meter peak. He calls his wife Katia from 8,400 meters, just 85 meters below the summit. A weather window is closing rapidly, a storm system approaching. Lafaille is exhausted but determined to complete this historic first ascent. His satellite phone allows real-time communication with base camp and family. His wife coordinates rescue logistics from France via satellite link. The weather forecast shows a 48-hour storm approaching his climbing route. His final call comes at 3:47 p.m. "I'm very close to summit, but very tired." The transmission quality deteriorates as storm interference increases. Lafaille's voice is calm but shows signs of exhaustion and hypoxia. The call cuts to static mid-sentence and is never resumed despite repeated attempts. Rescue helicopters are grounded by storm conditions for 6 days. An extensive search operation finds no trace of Lafaille or his equipment. The satellite phone never transmits again, its battery likely exhausted. His body remains somewhere on Makalu's upper slopes, another climber claimed by the mountain's vastness. Modern communication technology creates false hope for impossible rescues. Weather windows close faster than rescue operations can mobilize. Final transmissions become permanent records of last moments, voices preserved in digital memory, but bodies never recovered. June 8, 1985. Ciudad Grande, Peru. Joe Simpson begins a solo crawl after his partner cuts the rope connecting them. The British climber, 25 years old, has a shattered leg and has been abandoned in a crevasse. His partner Simon Yates was forced to cut the rope during a storm to save his own life. Simpson faces a 3-day crawl across a glacier with a broken leg and no food. Simpson hears a clear, authoritative voice directing his movements. This hallucinated companion provides route finding through treacherous crevasse fields. The voice becomes more real than physical pain or exhaustion, a neurological survival mechanism keeping Simpson moving towards safety. Against impossible odds, Simpson reaches base camp after 3 days. Medical analysis confirms the third man factor as his brain's survival response. The phenomenon is later documented in other extreme survival cases, becoming a classic study in survival psychology. Simpson's experience reveals how the dying brain generates companions to assist in survival, how hallucinations can be more helpful than harmful in extreme situations, and how human psychology adapts to impossible circumstances through altered perception. September the 27th, 2017. El Capitan, Yosemite. A massive granite sheet detaches from the wall. Multiple climbing parties are on various routes when the rockfall begins. A house-sized granite flake separates after decades of freeze-thaw cycles. Climbers have no warning, no time to seek shelter or retreat. LiDAR scanning later reveals how freeze-thaw cycles slowly fracture granite. Water enters cracks, freezes, expands, gradually separating rock layers. This process occurs over decades, invisible to climbers on the wall. Geological time intersects with human time in a single catastrophic moment. A 130-foot granite sheet weighing thousands of tons breaks free. The rockfall creates a debris field covering multiple climbing routes. Climbers are struck by house-sized blocks moving at terminal velocity. A dust cloud obscures the wall for hours, hampering rescue operations. One climber is killed instantly, another critically injured. Rescue teams use helicopters to evacuate the injured from the wall. Geological surveys reveal additional unstable rock formations. Some climbing routes are permanently closed due to ongoing rockfall danger. The climbing community has responded to these tragedies. The industry implemented equipment retirement guidelines after harness failures. High-altitude psychology research expanded after summit fever studies. Solo climbing protocols were revised to include mandatory check-in systems. Geological monitoring systems were installed on popular climbing areas. Elias Thorne's final moments, like those of every climber we've examined, reveal the fundamental truth about vertical pursuits. The mountain operates on geological time while humans operate on heartbeat time. From Sharp's fatal rest to Steck's shattered flow state, from Lafayette's ghost transmission to Simpson's survival hallucinations, each death demonstrates how quickly human control becomes illusion. The mountain doesn't care about experience, equipment, or communication technology. It simply waits, patient as stone, for that moment when human ambition intersects with forces that have been building pressure for millennia. In that intersection, final moments are born, quiet, sudden, and absolute. Which of these final moments affected you most? The silent solo death or the ghost transmission that faded to static? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to understand more about how mountains reveal their true nature in climbers' final seconds, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Final Moments. Next time we examine the psychology of cave diving deaths, where the exit is always visible but never reachable. Until then, remember that the mountain's patience always outlasts human ambition, and final moments arrive without warning or mercy.